Good afternoon, everyone. This is Marla Halley. Thank you for joining Quick and Beautiful Apps in Angular. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes until we make sure everyone has a chance to join. So just hang tight for a few minutes and we'll be right back. Hi, everyone. I think we're ready to go. Again, my name is Marla Halley. I'd like to extend a very warm and special welcome to each one of you here as we are participating in the 14th annual Taste of IT. Please join me in thanking our sponsors. Our diamond sponsor is Cincinnati State. Our gold sponsor is Cadre, Checkpoint, and UCTA. And to all of our annual partners, ATC, Affidance, CareSource, Cincinnati Bell, Google, Round Tower, University of Dayton, and of course Wright State and Uptime. We couldn't do this without all of your support. We thank you so much. So I think we're ready to get started. Rodney Kendall is a senior full stack development guru for Smart Data. He's always up to learn a new technology and help out another developer with a problem. So please join me in welcoming Rodney from Smart Data. Thank you. Hi, everyone. We're working on an audio issue, so we'll be right back with you.
Oh,
Okay, go ahead. So you just tell them we're here.
Hi, Rodney. We're here. Can you hear us?
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yay!
Yay!
All
Thanks
right.
for joining us.
Yeah, no problem.
You mute whatever you want.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're ready, Rodney.
Great. So go ahead and get started.
Yeah, go right ahead. Sorry, we already introduced you, and so just if you want to pull up your slides,
Oh.
we're ready to go.
Okay, well, I'm glad everybody knows who I am already.
Yes.
I'm online. Okay, let me get this started here. Assume everybody can see the presentation. Yes? Okay. Well, today what we're going to be talking about is how quick and easy it is to make really nice looking apps in Angular with very little coding and mostly just right out of the box. So I work at a company called Smart Data, and I'm happy to be here today to present here at Taste of IT. So who am I? My name is Rodney Kendall. I'm a senior full stack development guru. That's my actual title at Smart Data. It's a great company to work at. I've been working in IT for over 30 years now, and I've dabbled in pretty much everything from Microsoft Stack to Laravel to all kinds of other things that are out there.
Rodney,
Yes.
sorry, we
Yes.
can't see your slides.
You can't see my slides.
Can't see your slides.
Oh,
We see
Stained glass
you.
window.
Yeah, beautiful stained glass window behind you.
well, I'm glad you like it. What am I doing wrong? Yeah, I'm an IT professional, let me tell you. Let me see, how do I share my desktop? Is it sharing now?
There we
Yeah.
go. Yes, thank you.
Great, let's go back to where we were and let us continue. So, as I was saying, yeah, so I've been in pretty much everything about IT at one time or another. You can reach me if you need to at rodney.kendall@smartdata.net, or my LinkedIn there is Rodney K. So what are we doing today? We're going to learn how to create a really cool app in Angular. We're going to see how easy it is with just a little bit of coding, and to really understand it, you should probably have some understanding of JavaScript, but it's no problem if you don't, because I am going to go through what it is and explain what's going on in the code as well. We're going to see some really cool coding standards, because that's something I really stand behind, and some really easy to read code. And we're also going to see how easy it is to make a really, really cool app, not just one of those cool apps you see every day. So, what is Angular? First of all, you can get Angular at angular.io. And what it is it's a framework for mobile and desktop development. It's developed by Google. It includes user interface and integration with other systems all in one. It's really easy to use and really easy to reuse components that you make. So everything you need for a great user experience can also be right out of the box with Angular Material, which we'll talk about in a few moments. Angular, by default, uses what's called TypeScript, which is something that makes development with JavaScript easier and less error-prone. And this is not what you may have heard of AngularJS, which was the first version of it, which was in JavaScript. But the modern Angular is all in TypeScript. So, first of all, it is cross-platform. From the same development, you can create a modern web platform. You can also create native apps for iOS or the other, Android. Yeah, I don't use Android very much. Or you can make desktop apps, in fact, for Mac and Windows and Linux as well. And it's all in the same environment. It has great code generation. You put in attributes on your components and other things, and it generates a lot of code for you automatically. It's universal. It uses Node.js, which it can actually be used as a server as well, but it makes performance really high performance and easy to use. And you can split up your code into components and little parts and services that makes it a lot easier to develop and a lot easier to maintain and improve upon later. So you can use templates. In fact, it does use templates. That is basically the UI side, the HTML. And you can also make heavy use of the command line interface. For the longest time, everything was going away from using a command line because things in Windows are really cool. But it turns out that using the command line interface can really speed up things, especially with development. And they have a very good CLI with Angular that's included. And you can also use integrated development environments like Visual Studio or Visual Code or pretty much anything that you can see text files in and make changes, and it's really cool. So with Angular, unlike some other frameworks that you have or you may have heard of, this includes the whole development cycle from testing what you've made. It includes animation built in that makes things look a lot better. It also includes easy support for accessibility, which is, this was the coolest word that I found when I first got into Angular. It uses a numeronym, which is A11Y, which stands for accessibility. So if you haven't learned anything else today, you may have just learned a new word called numeronym, and I thought that was really cool. So why are we going to use Angular Material? Well, it's really easy to use. It has a very modern UI appearance that looks a whole lot like Google's own things because it comes from Google. It has very eye-popping built-in features. It works great across the web, mobile, and desktop, and it performs very quickly. It can also be themable, where you can change your colors and make it your own for your organization. And Angular Material is specifically made for Angular, so it works very well with Angular. So let's make an app. What we're going to do today is we're going to use a news app, or a news feed rather, a news API, that's going to give us top stories across a bunch of different sources. And we're going to display it in a nice, cool looking way and allow for searching and making it nice. So we're going to be able to also limit which sources we use from the whole list or do all of them. So this is what it looks like. This is really, really cool. It's with very little code. We're going to have this fully operational, actually going to the real websites, getting the real data, and showing it in real time. So first of all, you have to install Node.js, which is, you can go to nodejs.org and you can download, I do recommend the LTS version, which is the latest that is definitely stable. But once you install that, then you can also, if you wanted to, beyond using for Angular and things like this, you could also start making your own server apps with Node.js. But that's a different topic. Next, you have to install Angular, which there's two different installs. Once we installed Node.js, it also comes with its own command line interface, which is NPM. And when you can use NPM to install Angular Core and Angular CLI, which are packages that are stored out on the internet that NPM goes out and grabs and brings them locally and installs them for you. And that -G that's on both of those stands for global, so it installs it across your whole computer, so you can use it for other applications as well. Then you can verify the install with each of those different possible items to type in, but what you see on the far right here is the output of NGV, which is the version under Node.js, and it shows you the Angular CLI version and your Angular version and the various packages that are installed by default. So at this point, you'll have a fully functional Angular environment that you can start making your own codes in, or your own programs in. So again, we're going to keep using that CLI under NG, and we're going to create the base application with just one line. Then we're going to go into that folder and we're going to serve it up as a server so we can actually look at it. So I've actually already done these steps, and we are going to jump over, hopefully, and see them. right here. So right out of the box, this thing is coming up, and you can see it's a fully functional application as it is. It can jump over to the Angular site, and it tells you how to install Angular material, create components, and all these other neat little things. But it doesn't do what we want it to do yet. But it is an app in and of itself. But let's go on to the next step. Hopefully this is going to work right where it is. Okay, I'll just take that. Sorry, little technical difficulty. Okay, so this is where we were. The next thing, we're going to install Angular material. Again, we're going to use the user interface, or I'm sorry, the command line interface rather. And we're just going to type in ng add and then @angular/material. Now what that does is it changes some files automatically inside of the package or the application that's been created. It adds references in a file called package.json, which is just a list of different names of packages and the version that you have installed. It also adds import information into another module that's already in there, a TypeScript module, which is what the TS extension is for. And it's the app module tells the Angular system what other pieces you want to bring into your Angular app to make it useful. And it also changes a couple of other files, which we'll take a look at in a few minutes. But then again, we can again go to ng-serve and bring up the application. So in this case, there's not much difference. And what I've done here, wrong thing, is you can actually use ng-serve and tell it to use a different port number. So I already have this new version running under another window here, which is port 4300. You'll see that right this second, we've installed Angular material, but it doesn't really change anything at this point. They look exactly the same. So far it doesn't look like we've done much, but we're going to continue and see it even better. I know there's a way to continue play right where I am, but I just am not getting it. So I'm just going to continue running. Okay. So the next thing that we have to do is we have to set up this news feed that we were talking about. And it's very simple. There is this site called newsapi.org, and it automatically sends, or rather compiles the information and allows you to download the various current news articles. And it's real simple. You go to newsapi.org, and there's a big link there that says Get API Key. You click on it, enter in some information, and it generates an API key for you. Now, you'll see that it's blacked out here, or rather whited out, I should say. And the reason for that is the API key is something you don't want to give out, because you can only use it a certain number of times each day for free. Otherwise, they start charging you or insisting you charge. So you have to get your own in order to set up your own. So now we're going to start getting into the actual code, and I'm going to slow down a little bit to talk about it. There's a few parts that go into every Angular code base. One is what's called a CSS file, which is Cascading Style Sheet. There's several different levels. There's a global one called styles.css, which is used by default across the entire application. And then each individual component can have their own that is encapsulated, meaning that it only operates on that one little piece of your application. And the reason for that is it makes it a lot more modular, as far as a specific component that you add is not going to affect anything else, which a lot of website development, when you start adding these styles, it will affect different parts that have already been created and something that doesn't look right anymore. So that encapsulation eliminates that possibility. Although you can override that and tell it to forget about that and just use the CSS styles across the entire application anyway. But in any case, this is a CSS style sheet. And the way that it works, a cascading style sheet, is there are classes or different tags that you can use to tell it that this is the way that you want it to be. So the first two things we have here is HTML and body. And there's, by default, this file includes the first part there, which says that I want this application to be the full height of the browser, 100%. Then by default, it's got the font family, which is the type of fonts that are used. And the reason that there's a list of them is when you're dealing with the web, each individual system may or may not have different fonts that you want to use. So it's going to go down this list and find the first one that matches that particular system. Sans serif is pretty much guaranteed to be on any modern system. So if nothing else, that one's definitely going to be able to be used. But Roboto looks kind of cool. And after that, then Helvetica is a little bit not as cool. That's why it goes that order. Then these other things here are describing different attributes of how to display the screen as well. And the next one is padding top. And it says, I want a padding of they're called EMs. It's a particular unit that is used that's very specific on each system. So it's only going to have that exact space at the top of the screen. Then I want the background color, everything behind my main application, to be a light gray, just to have a consistent look. Then I want my application inside of here to be 80% of the width of the view inside of the browser. So however big they make the browser itself is going to figure out how much 80% of that view is, and that's exactly what the app is going to be viewed within. And I also wanted to display in what's called inline block. There's a lot of different display modes, but basically it says I want it to be a rectangle of a sort, and I don't want it to be pushed away from where it's supposed to be. It also says here that the left side is going to be exactly 10% of the view width. So since the width of the main application is 80%, the right is already 90, or the last 10% of the 100. So it's right in the middle of the screen. And then the last thing it says is I want it to be positioned absolutely. There's two main modes of positioning. You can either position it based upon the top left corner of the browser, which is position absolute, or relative, which means whatever component this is lives within, I want this to be relatively placed within it. So in this case, we want to go by the browser. We want it right in the center and taking up 8 out of 10 parts of the screen at all times. So another thing that is a cool thing about Angular is you can have a list of more than one style sheet that's automatically applied. And that's how the theming is used. This first part here, it says styles, node modules, Angular material, pre-built themes, deep purple, amber. Now, for those of us who grew up in the 70s, deep purple was the only viable option to choose among the built-in themes. But if you don't understand that, then you need to listen to more music. In any case, then it also says that the next thing after the theme is that styles.css that we just saw on the last one. So it's going to apply the theme, and then it's going to apply our specific things above that, or after that. So when we're making an application, we need to do several things. We need to feed it with something, some sort of data. We need to have it know what to do, have a brain. We need it to have a face that can be seen, and then we need to add makeup to that face to make it look pretty. So first of all, we're going to talk about the food, a service that we create in the background that will be used to go out to the news API, get the news articles, and bring them in based upon the user's input. So the way to create a service is just like with creating a component. The only difference is we do ng, then G, which stands for generate, then the word service, and then the service name we want to use. In this case, we use news. So it's going to create a service called news.service.ts automatically. And all that it's going to be in there is just the very basic news, or rather service parts, which doesn't do anything. But then we're going to add to it. And this is the actual news service class inside of TypeScript. So by default, it's got the very first line up there, which is import, and I'm going to explain those in just a moment. And then it's got the part that says the @ injectable provided in root, and then export class news service. And then that's it by default, because, well, in the constructor that doesn't do anything, right? So by default, a service doesn't do anything, but what we're doing is we're adding into it. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to use HTTP client, which is Angular is an actual framework versus some other systems that you may have heard, like React and some others, that the framework has a lot of things built into it that you can tap into. Even though React does have certain things you can tap into, there's a lot more inside of Angular. And one of those things is an HTTP interface where you can work with a server somewhere to get information from it, send new information to it, or make other kinds of requests. And that is all done through the HTTP client. And HTTP, by the way, stands for Hypertext Transport Protocol. But all that it really means is you're sending text or words that are going to tell the server what you want to do. Next, the next thing that's going on here is, I should explain one thing first. Import inside of TypeScript is saying, I want you to go to another place, another file somewhere, and get stuff from there. So the @angular/core and @angular/common/HTTP actually goes to a folder that's called node modules, and then looks for another folder called Angular, and another folder called core or common, and then HTTP, and then looks and brings up a file, a TS file, and then looks for an object that's created in there. And the first one, it's looking for one that's called injectable, which is how a service is used. What that means is you can use what's called constructor injection. And on each one of your components, you can, on your constructor, which instructs the system on how you want this thing to be created, it can ask for an already created instance of a particular object. In this particular case, if you'll see on the constructor down here, back. Previous, there we go. The constructor here is going to ask for an HTTP client instance, and then we're going to call it HTTP inside of the code here. So the JavaScript engine, which is what TypeScript gets transpiled into, is going to create an HTTP client object, and then it's going to give us that already created object. So before any kind of injection, you would have to go and create this other object and set all of its properties and set it all up as necessary. But with injection, all of that specialized setup is done automatically for you based upon how that particular class was set up to be injected. So that saves a lot of time and effort and eliminates a lot of common mistakes that happen when you're creating your own objects. In any case, so we're going to use an HTTP client, but we're also going to grab from a file called source.ts a class called sources, which we'll look at in a few moments. But essentially what it is that news site out there has a format that it's going to send us the information. And the way that you take that information and are able to use it directly in your code is through the creation of an object that it's going to map those attributes that are coming down into that object to make it a lot more easy, or a lot simpler rather. Then the next thing here is I'm also including something called API key, and that's from the news API org, my API key, I'm actually just putting it into another file here so that I can show you this whole screen and not have to hide anything, first of all, but also that makes it easier to change the keys should that be necessary. Now, down into the actual code here. So what does a service do? A service is something else that can be injected into either another service or a component or anything else that you create inside of Angular here. And a service generally is going to do something for you, and that's the whole point of a service. In this case, our service is going to take care of all of the logic behind the requests that the the user interface is going to make about, I want this particular source, I want to search for this particular text in that source, or anything like that. This is going to take care of all that logic around that. So to make that happen, we need to use Universal Resource Locator, URLs, that are specific to the news API. And these first three items here, these are variables which are set to the base URL, which is when you go to newsapi.org/v2/top headlines, and then you pass in for parameters to that, country, United States, US, and then the API key, then it's going to give back all of the US-based news sources. The country is required by the API, so that's why that's in there, and as is the API key. Next, if the user is searching for, or rather is being limited to which particular sources they want to see, we have to use this sources URL that limits it to, such as, I just want to see CNN, or I just want to see MSNBC or something like that, or a list of those. And that URL is what takes care of that. Then the last one is the source base URL, which gives you just the top headlines across all the sources as well, in a special case. So you have to be able to search, and the different URLs are what allow you to search rather. So first of all, we have inside of the constructor, we're not doing anything at all. We're just allowing the system to create an HTTP client instance for us. But later on, we're going to initialize the sources from our component that calls this service. And to initialize the sources, it gets all the sources using that sources URL. That's right. The sources URL gives you a list of sources. I'm sorry. That's correct. Then the source base URL is the one that you use to limit it to sources and be able to search. That's correct. Then for getting the top headlines, we go to the base URL, which is this get top headlines will do that for us. So the HTTP object that we asked for up here is going to use the get protocol, which says give me stuff from the server. It's going to return objects in the format of the sources object, and it's going to use the sources URL to get them. Then on the top headlines, instead, it's going to, again, get from the server whatever it sends us from the base URL. Any says just whatever it is, I'll take it. Then we have to have some specialized things in order to get the headlines by keyword. We have to supply a parameter called Q, which is what we see down here, and then whatever keyword the user entered. And then it calls the get top headlines based upon that information if there is no keyword. And then finally, we can search by articles by source. So it's going to pass in a list of sources and potentially a keyword if they've entered one. And this code down here adds the proper parameters and then calls the right URL. So that's what the service does. So, as I said, there's this source TS file that was included in the service. And what that is these classes here are the forms of data that can come back from the API. So first of all, we got the source. There's an ID, a name, a description, the URL to the actual article, the category it's in, the language, and the country. So all that information, that's the format it comes back in. And then this sources, which is what we're actually including, is a complete list of all those sources, individual sources. And then simple source is something I needed at one point to make it easier to manipulate things, is all that's there for. Okay, so like I said, we need a brain to tell the Angular system what we want to do. So app-component.ts is that brain. And what it is a component, which components can be created to do whatever you need, but essentially it's a piece of the screen that you see is going to be some sort of component. A component can then have other components in it, so you put all these components together and you make your whole setup. In our particular case here, we only need one component because what we're doing is fairly simple. So again, we're going to use the import. We're going to say we want it to be a component, so we need from Angular, we need to know how to make a component, so we bring in component, and then we want to do something when that component is being initialized. Inside of Angular, there are different stages that happen each time that something is created. There's the initial construction, and there's when it's being initialized, all the way down to when it's being destroyed. So each of those can be individually trapped and do something at those times. In our case, we just want to be able to do something when the constructor is being initialized. Or I'm sorry, when the component is being initialized. So on down to here, this is where I'm including simple source that I mentioned a moment ago. And what that's actually used for is there's going to be a list of sources that the user has selected to limit it to, and those are going to be shown across the top in little circle icons that they can then individually take back off, or they can remove all of them and go back to the full list. So we've got a few variables here. We've got our list of sources we're going to load up. We got a list of articles that are coming back from the selected sources and based upon any keyword that was entered. Then we have the keyword, then a title that we want to show on the screen, and our selected sources. So in our constructor here, we're using constructor injection to get an instance of that new service object that we created, or new service class rather. And then, since we have that, and we're going to call it news service, then when it comes to the stage of creating this inside of Angular that the component is to be initialized, we're going to first initialize the sources, and then we're going to use what's called an observable, which basically says I want to do this asynchronously instead of synchronously. By default, JavaScript is synchronous, which means step 1, then step 2, then step 3, then step 4, on and on. But with asynchronous processing, we're able to go from step 1, send off a process and wait for it to come back, continue with step 3, step 4, step 5, and whenever this comes back, then we can do something with that information that went off and came back. So that's what this subscribe does, is it waits for that result to come from the server, and then we populate our sources array, and that's just the list of available sources. And we're also going to go ahead and create another observable, which gets the current top headlines based upon no sources being limited, so it's all sources, and no keywords, so it's whatever's the current main headlines are all going to come back. And that's we're going to put in our current list of articles. At some point, the user is going to do something, whether it is they select one or more sources that they want to limit it to, or they enter a keyword, and we're going to then have events that happen based upon their user input. And one of those is when they make a selection of different sources, we're going to get the articles again. So we're going to get the list of sources if they made a list, or if there's none, if they haven't made any selections, then we're just going to go out and we're going to get all the articles based upon the sources that we have. So by default, it's going to be that whole list of all the sources. Otherwise, it's going to be individual ones. Another thing that's necessary to make the UI work just right is, by default, when you're typing in something into a text field, it doesn't just automatically send that to the back end to the component until you do something. And what I'm using is a key event. So when you press a key and release it, it's a key up event. And this one is going to look for the enter key being pressed. And if you've pressed the enter key, it's going to get articles based upon whatever keyword you've entered at that point. So that's just makes it a little bit easier for the user to use. Then they could also instead select a single source that they want to limit it to, or add to the list of sources that it's limited to. So the select source event is what handles that. And all it does is it just adds that source to the list of selected sources and then gets the articles again. There's also another button that's going to show up. It's a little X that will remove all of the sources that they've selected to limit it to at one time, and then bring back all the articles again based upon all the available sources. And then the last one is those sources that they have selected, they can click on them individually to remove them from the list of sources that it's limited to, and it'll get the articles again based upon whatever is left in that list. Now, after the brain, then you have to have something for people to look at, and that's the face. And the face is in HTML, Hypertext Markup Language. You've probably heard of HTML before. It's basically just a word way of telling the browser how to do things. And with Angular, the components that you create have their own names that'll show up as tags. And a tag is enclosed inside of a less than and greater than. So up here at the top, we have mat toolbar row, and that's mat. These mat things here are the material components that we're using. And we didn't have to do anything special other than just put these tags in here saying that we want to use it. So the toolbar is going to show up along the top. It's going to have the way for them to look at all the sources and the ones that they've selected, if they have selected, or being able to do the search with keywords. So that's what this up here is doing. So we've got a button to clear sources. We've got an avatar, which is a little picture, which is going to show each of the sources. Then we've got some space in between, and then the keyword field. And in the keyword field, we've got the key up event, like I mentioned a moment ago. It's going to call the check method, and it's going to send in the whatever key they typed. And then we also have this weird looking thing over here with keyword. It's the word ng model inside of parentheses, which is then inside of square brackets. That is an Angular thing which says the square brackets are saying whatever value is in here, I want to store in the keyword variable inside of the component TS. And then the parentheses are saying anytime something is changed, I also want it to update that. So that's called two-way updates, essentially. So it's whatever happens inside of the component code to change keyword will show up on the screen, and anything that the user types in to that field will also change what's inside of the component. So that's the two-way communication. Then we're going to have what's called a side nav, which is going to slide in from the side. It's going to be a list of all of our sources. So this side nav is going to use a list component, and each one of the list items is our sources. And it uses what's called it uses a special thing from Angular, ng4. Basically, if you know anything about programming and you've heard of loops before, that says for every individual item that's in our sources array, we're going to create this particular tag, this mat list item, before we send it to the browser. So it's going to cycle through all of the current sources and create that whole list. Again, we use the mat card avatar to show the individual pictures, and then we show the source name as well. Then we have a click command there that will select the source when they want to click it, and then it'll close the side nav. Let's see. Then we have what's called a mat card, which is a card is just a rectangle that shows on the screen. It has certain attributes. It can have a title and a footer and content. So it's just something from material that makes things look consistent across your application. And we are setting the title and a subtitle, and we are also adding an image of the whatever the article's image was, and it'll show full screen, and then, or not full screen, but all the way across. And then it'll also show any kind of description that came back. And then we also have at the bottom a button that is a more. It's going to say more with a little I button, an I icon, that they can click on and go to the actual article. And if there aren't any articles, and it's going to show a different card that says no articles are available, select a different source or search with a different keyword. Okay, so once you have your face, then you want it to make it look good by adding makeup, and the makeup is our component CSS. All these different tags over here that are classes rather, are telling it to do different things. Rather than getting into all the minutia of that, basically this is what's telling the browser how to make that slide in navigation look right, and how to make the top of it look right, and everything as far as where it's going to be. That's what these do individually. Now, in order to show these sources, we need to have the pictures for the sources, and there is a source for that at newsapi.org/sources. And the one thing about it is you have to go one by one. You have to get each one. So this is the part that would take the longest doing it originally or from scratch. The good thing is I went ahead and did this, and I put them into a folder inside of the source called, under assets, called sources. This folder called assets is automatically copied into what's sent to the browser. So anything in there is already available for it. And so now we're going to see what all this does. And to do that, we're going to jump over here to, again, another window that I already have running. And this is the actual application as it is right now. So we've got this, just says headlines, because these are all headlines. We've got this, what's called a hamburger icon. If you've never heard that phrase, the 3 lines, that's what people call it. Click on that, and it shows the list of all the sources that are currently available. I scrolled too much. It's easy to scroll too much. Okay, but then you can change it to just individual ones. So let's say we just wanted to see ABC News. So now the only things we see are articles from ABC. Let's say we also want to look at what CBS has to say, and we want to look at CNN. So those 3 are now the only sources that show up in here. And each one of these, you see, there's the source icon over here, the description up here, the headline. The headline's up here, then the name of the source it's from, the picture from that particular article, the description, and then this link here that goes to the actual article over on the appropriate site. We're not going to watch a video right now, but then you can individually remove sources by clicking on them, or you can remove all of them like that, or you can do a search. No articles for Pence right now. Well, I guess there's probably articles for Trump. Yep, look at that. So it'll limit to articles that only have that particular text in it. So that's the entire application, and it's completely operational, and it only took us 30 minutes to do. Does anyone have any questions? Is anyone still there?
Hi, Rodney.
Yes.
We don't see questions from our end.
Okay.
That was a great presentation, so informative, and I did get the Deep Purple comment.
Oh, good.
All right, any other information you might like to share?
Just that I highly recommend Angular, and if anybody needs any help with Angular, give me a call.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Rodney. We greatly appreciate it. Special thanks to Smart Data, that's our featured sponsor for this session. So with that, remember to complete the survey for this session by finding it in the link under My Agenda, Session Descriptions. It's the same place you clicked to join this session. And by participating in this survey, you make your voice heard and gives us great feedback. Thank you for taking the time to fill that out. Our next session begins at 2:45, so use this time to grab a snack or check out the exhibitors space. There's some great resources in there, and just continue to explore the event platform. There are game codes you can earn by explaining the app and then, or exploring the app rather, so go to the event game tab. And just as a reminder, the game code for attending this session is Angular. Again, Rodney from Smart Data, thank you so much for everything.
Thank you.